of you who may be joining us for the first time. I want to begin with an expression of intention this morning to honor and recognize the indigenous lands where we are and the caretakers of those lands. So here in Lubbock, we are gathered today on the lands of the Comanche people, and in the greater region has a diverse and important connections to the Apache tribe of Oklahoma, the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, the Jicarilla Apache Nation, the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma, and the Mescalero Apache tribe. I think that it is important to remember that Native people have special and enduring connections to places where we live as guests, and that we cultivate awareness of how the socio-historical world that we occupy came to be. I think that this intention is also important because it helps to center us for the occasion this morning, which is to discuss and learn from the work of very talented and important artists whom we have with us today, and perhaps also to find inspiration in our own practices and creative expression. So today, this morning, we will start with an artist panel featuring Jane Osti, Karin Walkingstick, and Courtney YellowHorse-Metzger. Jane Osti is a member of the Cherokee Nation from Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and formally recognized as a Cherokee National Treasure. Osti began making art, including painting, during her time in California, but it was when she returned to Oklahoma in classes at Northeastern State University that she took ceramics. There, Osti began working with the late Cherokee National Treasure, Anna Sixcoat-Mitchell, who was responsible for initiating the revival of customary Cherokee pottery in Oklahoma, where it had fallen inactive under the pressures of relocation and assimilation. Osti and Mitchell became close friends and collaborators. Yes, we have works by each of you that I'll be projecting while I introduce you. Osti and Mitchell became close friends and collaborators, and Jane went on to build a career as a professional artist, drawing on a long history of southeastern and ancestral Cherokee pottery, employing customary techniques such as paddle stamping and incise design, but adding to this innovative tradition her own sculptural flair and graceful approach to forms. Jane has received numerous awards from many different exhibition venues, including Santa Fe Indian Art Market, the 5 Civilized Tribes Museum, the Red Earth Indian Arts Festival, and the Cherokee Annual Art Show. Prominent collectors of Jane's work include the Cherokee Nation, which has generously lent several pieces of our show, and Smithsonian Institution's American Art Museum and National Museum of the American Indian. And Jane has several slides that she's sent me to add to this show, so I'm just going to go through those really quickly, and she's going to talk about them in a bit. Karin Walkingstick is a contemporary potter from Cherokee Nation who began her career taking classes with Cherokee National Treasure Jane Osti, who went on to become her mentor as Walkingstick's work developed. Karin has created her own personal style based in the use of color, varied firing techniques, and adaptation of wide-ranging inspirations from pre-contact Mississippian iconography to Art Nouveau glassware to the natural world surrounding her, combining references to plants and animals with geographic and cultural significance. Her work has garnered numerous awards from venues such as the Santa Fe Indian Art Market, the Red Earth Festival, the Herd Museum, Guild Indian Fair and Market, and the Cherokee Art Market. To this biography, I would only add that I had originally asked Karin to be part of the belonging exhibition, and it was with some sadness that it didn't work out. I am all the more delighted, therefore, that we can have you here today on the panel. We have a few more slides that we submitted as well. And finally, Courtney YellowHorse-Metzger is an Osage artist from the Great Horse District in Oklahoma, who studied first at Missouri State University, where she obtained her BA in ceramics, and then earned an MFA from the University of New Mexico in 2020. She currently teaches ceramics courses at the University of New Mexico Gallup. Belonging and relationality are central themes to YellowHorse-Metzger's work, which includes molded body casts, installations, and video performances centered on unfired clay slip and culturally significant locations. YellowHorse-Metzger has exhibited at Missouri State University, the Osage Nation Museum, the Artworks Gallery in Richmond, Virginia, the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts in New York, and the 415 Gallery, 516 Arts, and Harvard Art Center, all in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I always like to add that I first met Courtney as a graduate student in my classes while I was teaching at the University of New Mexico. And so it is such an honor, and I'm so proud to include her very deserving work in our show and to share it with her. So thank you to all of you. All right, so we are going to share mics and discuss some questions together. But I wanted to start in thinking about writing a catalog for this show. I have tried to emphasize the importance of mentorship and close relationships in which learning takes place. And so I'd like to hear each of you talk today about the defining learning experiences that you've all had and mentors along your road to becoming the artist that you are today. So what mentoring relationships really shaped you and how you would turn past that knowledge along?
Had a lot of mentors and teachers along the way, including my college professor, Jerry Chubb, and then Anna Mitchell was the next pottery mentor that I had. And other artists, I count them as mentors, because I'm inspired and influenced by their work also, and they share a lot of knowledge with us. So I have had a lot of good mentoring from a lot of different sources, and I have tried to pass that on. You have a slide, I believe, of my granddaughter. Karin's I can't take credit for what Karin does. She's her own person and does her own beautiful work, but she's my star mentee. We've had as Ann and I had a lifelong relationship until she passed away, and I think Karin and I are headed there. And this is my granddaughter Lily, and she did her first art show at 14, and that was in my booth at Santa Fe, and she got a first place there. And then when she got out of school and started college, she kind of didn't work for a while, but she just recently started working again. And at Cherokee Art Market this year, she got best of division in the division I was in. Anyway, she's doing really well, and she doesn't want to copy what I do. She really wants to do her own thing. And anyway, I've had a great experience with mentoring and mentees. So,
Speak loudly.
Okay. Like we said, I learned from Jane. It was kind of weird. I had a friend that suggested we take a pottery class together. Can you guys hear me?
Well, it's a little,
you want to try
it's
to
wrong.
let's try
There's
to-
an awkward voice.
let's try to-
I'm sorry, I tried.
So, I had a friend that suggested, he found a pottery class. He said, I found a pottery class with Jane Osti. Let's go take this pottery class. And if you've ever seen those painting classes where a lot like Pino's Palette, where people, about 50 people get together and have a glass of wine and paint the same thing. That's what we kind of did without the wine. But we had the best time. There was probably 8 or 9 of us in class, and I met Jane that day, and that started, that was 10 years ago, almost going on 11 years now in July. But we took the class, and she said, well, we're going to make a bowl. So we're going to, she showed us some of the stuff that she did, and we said, there's a turtle that she makes, and we loved it. And we said, if we all agree to stay on the same page, can we please make this turtle? And she said, because it was a little bit more work, and she said, Sure, and we had the best time, and at the end of that class, it was like a 3-day class, and at the end of it, I fell in love with the clay. I really liked that medium, and I really liked Jane, and I thought, at the end of the class, I thought, how can I do more of this? And so I just spent, she was doing a series of classes, so I took the next class, and then the next class, and it was something fun. It was like a little hobby at first, and then it, like I said, it's turned into 10 years later, this is what we're doing. And I've been traveling. We've traveled to Maryland, we've traveled all over the place and had the best time doing it. We became great friends, and what was the question?
I just asked you to speak about like mentoring relationships, what they meant to you, and how you also try to pass your knowledge along.
Yeah, I think it's your responsibility. Once you learn this, you realize how important it is, and it's your responsibility to pass it on. And I don't do a lot of teach a lot of classes, and it's not in a big group. I do a lot of one-on-ones. So I feel like that's what we ended up doing, was I worked with Jane for about 8 months, and she thought I should be on my own and kicked me out of the nest one day, and like a baby bird. But yeah, I think it's important to keep that contact, and we met Chase and yeah, Anita, and there's so many great people that you meet along the way that have become lifelong friends and your community.
I think I can answer that. Thank you. So I think my mentorship, I probably wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for my college professors. Keith Exton and Kevin Hughes, they really took me under their wing. I had entered undergrad to be an art educator in the art ed program, and I ended up not enjoying the program, and they were the ones that called me. They were my advisors, and they called me and they're like, hey, if you're struggling, you don't have to do something you don't like to do, and we think that you would excel in the ceramics program. So if you want to apply for this program, we would, we would be really happy to work with you. And ever since those conversations, I was able to see through, their encouragement and their, lives and stuff, that you can make a career out of ceramics, and that's not just production pottery, which there's nothing wrong with production pottery, it's just not what I wanted to do. And so through their guidance, and I made it through undergrad, they encouraged me to go to grad school, and now I teach at UNM, and I'm doing what I initially started to do, but through ceramics and the things I really enjoy, and not just like a general high school art ed or something like that. It's through the college system. And so without Keith and Kevin, I probably would not even be where I'm at today. But once I got to grad school, there was one professor there, Clarence Cruz, who taught puzzle pottery, and he really encouraged me in embracing kind of who I am. And I was when I first got to UNM, I was really struggling, being mixed and living in a place that is, predominantly indigenous. I didn't feel like I could talk about my indigeneity in a way that was meaningful. And Clarence, he's from Oke Pueblo, and is a master of Pueblo pottery, and is very well known. And he was he was able to have those conversations with me that allowed me to fully embrace, being able to talk about being Osage and all the things that come with that through my art and through ceramics. But also in my personal life, my Uncle Eddie, he is somebody that I really look to teach me the ways of Osage people and our traditions and things like that. And he's been a leader to me and a guide to me for my whole entire life to to feel validated as an Osage person. But through those things, I now teach, I teach college, and I have some younger students that are still in high school, they're getting dual degrees, and I really hope that I can be, somebody that they look up to in the same way that I look up to my old professors, and continue those conversations with in the future.
So I'm going to suggest, Courtney, you and I can use our teaching voices, and maybe Jane and Karin, you can share for 5 minutes. So I'm going to scoot down.
I would sit near the chair. I'm gonna try them
All right, thank you. So can everybody hear me still? All right, great. All right, so this is a question we talked a little bit about last night as well, but the theme of the show and the symposium is belonging. And so this is something I've written about in the catalog and that I've tried to stress in our conversations together, but I'd love to hear all of you talk about what belonging means to you and the different kind of aspects of belonging. So to whom do we belong? And how does the idea of belonging show up in your work or affect your work?
I live in Tahlequah, and that's the capital of Cherokee Nation. And everywhere you go, you can see Cherokee writing. If I need to know anything from elders, they're right there. And it's also, where I was born, went to school not far from there. And where I got my degrees. And anyway, I feel at home there. I've lived in Northern and Southern California and Santa Fe, and Tahlequah is my home. And I feel comfortable there, and I've had a lot of help to do my work from there, and I belong to that community. I've tried other places, and I'd rather be by the beach sometimes, but Tahlequah is home, and I feel a real sense of belonging there. And with my work, I had people there that I could talk to, and they know the old stories, and some of them know about our old pottery and other artwork. And anyway, anything I need to sort of nourish what I'm doing in my career or my work, I can pretty much find in my home area there.
I live in Claremore, Oklahoma, so I live about a little bit an hour from Jane. So she lives right in Tahlequah, and I live an hour away, which makes it a little bit difficult, but I belong to my community. My family, my family is what inspires me a lot of times. You want to make them proud of you and what you do, and I'm glad they like what I do. But there's pottery that I've made that is inspired by my grandmother a lot of times. How I grew up. I belong to my Cherokee community in Rogers County. And I live in a little community called Iowa, and we have regular meetings, Cherokee meetings there, and it's good that we all have a place to get together there, not just a place away from where my family was from.
So I'm Osage, and all of my work deals with themes of belonging, because, like I mentioned previously, when I first got to Albuquerque for grad school, I felt strong sense of disconnect because I had moved away from my family and the land that I had grown up in, and that land and the people around me were what made me feel enough, if that's a weird word, but enough. And so whenever I got to Albuquerque, I felt really disconnected. I felt kind of lost, and I had to have those like really tough conversations about like, where do I belong, and am I enough to exist as an Osage person outside of my Osage culture, like location area, and the lands that like we feel so connected to, which I think Anita talked about last night about the land being part of our identity, and I felt so connected to that land and being like taken out of that space. I had like a full on, like identity crisis sort of. And so all of my work moving forward through that, I deals with a sense of belonging. And if you want to go back to my thesis show, if you can kind of see the progression of my thought process through this. These like the cast bust over there, it was like my first kind of like grappling with this sense, and so a lot of them, like some were made with red clay, some were made with white clay, red clay plastered on top and like painted and all this stuff, and that was kind of like my, like how do I deal, like obviously I'm very white presenting and I understand my place in that, but also like I know who I am as an Osage person. I know, I was raised traditional, I partake in ceremony and all the things, but I know how I come across, and so that is how I dealt with that. And so moving forward past that, I was able to go back home to the reservation on my allotment land and harvest clay from Fairfax, Oklahoma. And then I also went to Missouri, where I went to undergrad, which Missouri, that southern part of Missouri is part of the lands that we were removed out of during, before the reservation period. And I harvested clay there as well, and I took the clay and I processed it, and I took the clay back into those spaces, and I made these ritualistic style performance videos where I took that clay and I put it directly on my body as an act of like reconciling with who I am and in those lands, and my place as an Indigenous person in the spaces. And then moving past those things, I did a ceremony in the gallery space for my show, and I really, that piece is just about the ceremony itself and how personal that is for me, and leaving my body print in that space. And even the work that I am making now I'm past all those questions, and I am now in conversation with my ancestors and the family around me, and the encouragement that those things come from. And that's kind of, like all of my work centers around the sense of belonging and being a strong Osage woman.
Thank you. So family, kin, place, and connections to those things. One of the things that I think is fun about this panel is that, as we see with the slides, your work spans a really wide range of creative practices. Jane, you started out as a painter, and you played an important role in reviving Cherokee ceramics in Oklahoma. Karin, you learned from working with Jane, but you really defined your own style and your own set of influences, and your own artistic voice that is really, especially focused on vessels and pots. I think, Courtney, you on the other hand are exploring molding clay, using your body, installation, performance, video, all of these approaches. So there's a real diverse range. So I'd like for you to talk about clay, and what it means for you to work in clay, and how is the material itself significant for you? How does it shape your work?
Could you go to my first slide?
Sure.
The previous.
This one? Yeah.
Okay, this one is an example of our native clay, the hand-processed clay. And talking about our connection to clay. Every year when we grow a garden, I always grow squash plants, so I can use their leaves in the work that I do. And I call it a squash pot. Anyway, that's leaves from my garden that I impress into it to make the design. And Karin and I, we had this a few years ago. I can never name a pot. Clint always wants the name of the pot. And I guess most professionals do, but pots are really hard to name. So when I think of this clay and this pot, I think of abundance was what ended up being the name of the pot. But our people grew corned beans and squash, and I'm sure that provided for abundance in their diet and their life. And I think of it as something to be thankful for. And I believe they might have used plants and animals to honor them in some of our old pottery, a way of saying thank you for the sustenance. And that's what I think of when I'm building these. And anyway, that's an example of it's just before the cleanup stage, it's totally built. But that's when I enjoy clay the most, when it's still pliable, when it's still so alive. And I like it when it's fired, but that is my favorite stage, when the clay is still alive, but I like this live stage. And I really enjoy working with our native clay, although I mostly use commercial clay. When I started working, I was, over the last almost 40 years, that's what I've done. I haven't had another job. And the commercial clay is readily available, and I didn't have time to do all the processing and everything when I was doing 10, 12 shows a year. And I think Nita and some of us, we've all said before, even the commercial clay, it all comes from the earth. I just give myself a treat once or twice a year by working with the native clay. And anyway, Karin and I, a lot of us, we've taught a lot of other people how to process clay and how to get it to where we can use it. So we are passing that on. That's not all we do is work in native clay, and I'll be glad to admit it. Chase is one of the few that actually works in native clay all the time. But necessity has made me work with commercial clay in the beginning at least. Now I don't have the energy or the time to do all that work and processing. But my mentor, my teacher, Anna Mitchell, she never worked in anything with native clay. She never bought a piece of clay. She never had a kiln. And she taught me a lot, but I didn't necessarily follow in her footsteps with all the technical and things that came later, because she didn't have to pay utilities and rent with her pottery, and I kind of did. But I don't regret that, because I loved working in the clay every day. Couldn't wait to get up and start doing it. And pretty much lasted all these almost 40 years. I still look forward to it almost every day. Except I take a lot of naps now. Work a while, nap a while. Okay.
What does it mean for you to work in clay, and how does the material become part of your creative process?
Well, like I said, I was waiting for Jane, and in the first class we took, we used commercial clay, we wrote out of the bag, and that's how I started, was took some home and played with it for a little while, and it was easy to get, and so I started kind of backwards, I guess. Started with commercial clay, and then learned how to process, how to dig the clay, what to look for, how to build with it. It's different. And I build everything. I never built a pottery wheel. But I'm just done what I've been taught, and then I started doing shows and needing inventory, and it's easy to work right out of the bag with the commercial play. But there's nothing special about digging right the whole process of getting that the hand dug clay ready for building, and it is a long process, so it is easy to use commercial clay. I don't mind doing it, but like I said, I coil build everything. With the traditional pieces, I process the clay and fire outside, but I use a kiln. The first summer that I started, I got my own kiln and was really proud of being able to do that because, like I said, it was kind of a hobby at first, and it kind of turned into kind of snowballed and got bigger, and I started doing art shows and talking to other people, and I spent a little time with Richard Smith, and he does things different. There's so many different ways to get to the same place. James taught me how to techniques to do attach a coil, and just something that simple, you kind of fall into your own way of doing things. How don't do it exactly like she does anymore. You kind of develop your own little shortcuts or things that work for you, and what a better way that works for you. But that's kind of my background. I don't have a lot of experience to do. I have a lot of clay that I've done. Now, processing takes a lot longer, so I do have some sitting around. It's like, I'll deal with this later, and it's just quicker to pull it out of the bag. Finishing, a lot about finishing. I've used mason stains. I like to experiment with different colors. I've used different paints. I've saw someone else do it.
The place where they were honoring her to find all this clay around the building, and we all have gotten to enjoy that. So another final gift from Anna. Sorry.
Clay is such an important part of my process, and I think it goes back to the connection to the land and land being part of my identity, especially in, places like on the reservation. And one of the reasons why I went back to Missouri is because to harvest the clay there is because I recognize that our reservation has not always been ours, right? Like, we were placed there, we had been removed, whatever, and we purchased this land. But like, historically, I believe that like, the Quapaw kind of claimed that area. And so I recognize that even though that's where our like ceremony happens and like our babies are born there and like our ancestors have died there, hasn't always been ours. And so that's why going back to Missouri was really important for me to work in the land there and the clay that came from there. The clay is such an important part of my process. I do other things like textile and like performance and things like that, but it all centers around the clay body itself and the importance of the clay in all stages of the clay. So I use a lot of like slip painting and stuff like that, and you probably have seen that in the show here where I used slip to paint my handprints on the wall. I prefer clay without glaze on it. I use glaze every now and then to like enhance like a portion or a part or something, but I prefer just like the raw clay body itself. And I just feel it's such a visceral thing for me to have my and this is a little bit difficult for me to talk about because it's so emotional for me as opposed to it being like something that's like tangible. There's just like, even like the smell of the raw clay itself and the slip and the texture of it after it's been fired. It's just like, I can feel it here. Does that make sense? And that's why clay has always been the central focus of my things, and I think it's that connection to the Earth Mother, where the clay comes from.
Well, I think we have one more question, or time for one more question. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your artistic practice, and how you go from ideas to actually working the clay and finished work. How do you bring your ideas out in clay?
This reminds me of filling out application forms for shows. Hand-built, coil-made, or coil-built, handmade, and is the method I used to for pottery. I did go to school and learn the wheel drawing stuff. I did that for about 5 years, but I haven't done that in a long time. The hand-built coil method and the way I decide what I'm going to make doesn't very often happen. That very often is not what I make, but I get up really early in the morning, and that's when my head or my heart feels things that I might want to do. And once in a while I'll sketch something, and I hardly ever build what I sketch. Even if I head that direction when I first start out, the clay usually sends me in another direction before it's over. And I hardly ever make replicas or things that are just like our southeastern pottery, but that is the foundation of all my work. The way it was built and the designs that I use, there will probably always be something in there that will remind you or that is from our old pottery. And sometimes this process goes really quick and easy, and sometimes it's a struggle. And Anna always used to say when it went easy and it came out really good, she always said the ancestors helped, that she called them. Not that she called on them, but they helped. And we've had that, I speak for Karin too, we've had that experience where something just is easy to make and it just goes together. And I think somebody mentioned last night, that's when let somebody else go and then you finally let yourself go, that when yourself gets out of it, then the magic or the wonderful things happen. I don't know if I answered your question or not, I forgot what it was.
Talking about the process, how do you go about making your work?
Well, okay, after it is built, done all of that part of it, then the designing process, usually it's incised or paddle stamped, and sometimes just the addition of nodules and different things. But most of it's based on our old pottery, what I do. And after all that part is completed, I use a polishing stone to make it shiny. And I do so, when I work with native clay, it fires outside. When I work with commercial clay, it's fired in the kiln. And I don't usually add any color or any glazing to anything. And any color that's on my pottery, it is from the fuel in the fire. And I usually use pine needles and some sawdust, and once in a while throw a little horse dung in there. So it's usually just a variety of burning materials. That's how that one is darkened there. And this selection is what the commercial clay looks like, just fired. And the reason I included that is because it has a lot of our traditional designs that either came from shell work or pottery. And I've moved them around, changed them around a little bit. But those are just really small pots. This pot over here is about 22 inches tall, I believe. And my inspiration for that was our bird clay and the messengers. And then our wind directions, the wind in the big emblem there. But I don't know, something that came to mind when I was making that about our bird messengers. And that's what inspired that one. And anyway, would you want to go back to our turtle one?
Oh, yeah.
And this is a pot that just kind of flew together and made it in just a couple of days. And it's about this tall too, about that wide. But I got invented there, and this can on the left, 5-gallon can, I no longer was strong enough to turn the big fish pot over that I was making. So I had to figure out a way to do it, and for the neck to fit, you know, I usually hold them in my pot, or in my lap rather. And anyway, that fish pot I couldn't hold in my lap because I'd break the fins. So I finally I brought in a 5-gallon garbage can and put this egg crate around it. And then I was able to turn the fish pot over into that. And so when I made the turtle pot, I just graduated down, or went down to the 5-gallon bucket to do the same thing. And that's really gonna be a big help to me because I was able to decorate the whole bottom of the pot without holding it. So there's nothing new though. Richard St. Smith said he had something similar to that. But it was new for me just a couple of weeks ago to find that. That really helped me a lot, you know, it helped me be able to get to the pot and not damage the pot while I was working. So, anyway, I don't know if I answered what you said.
So a
Okay.
lot of your pots are quite large too.
Yes.
So,
Is it Virginia?
Okay, so I was nodding because it never turns out, but y'all were nodding your heads when she mentioned that. I don't draw anything, I just sit down and start working, and I just start building. And I build whatever's on my mind. I might have an idea of something I want to do, okay, so I included some process photos of a pot that was inspired, this was my inspiration over here with the flowers, it's a magnolia tree. And I built a new studio last year, and I used the magnolia tree that I have, it's the first thing that grows in the spring, and it smells really good, and I really hate to lose it. So I was going to do a pot from my magnolia tree that the bugs get on off of it last year and, well, year before last year. And I thought, well, I'll just draw them. What I did was I took them off, I got some big blooms and some little buds, and how I would drop them on the table and however they landed is how I drew them on the pot. So I wanted to include this to show that, this pot is probably about this tall. So knowing that I was gonna, usually the only thing I know when I start is if I'm gonna make something big or something small, or maybe what how I would like it to end up doesn't always happen that way. But, you know, I started with the slab and coil method. I rolled out a little piece of, it's like kind of like dough at first. You roll out a piece and cut a circle and then lay it over something that's round at the beginning. It's all along. Just something to make that curve and to get you started. And when it's dry enough to hold its own shape, and I'll flip it over and continue building, adding one coil at a time. This pot, I started on the bottom, and I knew I wanted it to be big, and the bottom part needs to be dry enough for the weight of the coil that I'm going to be adding to it. So I knew I needed to start my design early. So I started here on the bottom, and just kind of, however, if there's a space, I added a bigger bloom, and I would drop the blooms on the table and however they landed beside you. And then when I got finished with that part, I flipped it over and then continued building. And there's some more. So this is when I'm finished building it, but and polishing it, everything with the stone, and then letting it dry. This is what it looks like when it's dry. Getting it into the fire didn't kill. And it's commercial clay, and this is the color of it after it's been fired. And then this is after I painted it. I used acrylic paints on this one, and just so happened to get really close to the same color as the buds, but this pot is so big, it's big baby, and it gets so attached to these things, and taking it to a show or something, I'll put it in the car and seatbelt it in like a kid, and I'll have to slam in the brakes. Oh, you're right back there, and then just took it on in, and I have a couple people that travel with me sometimes on these trips, and we nicknamed it Maggie because it's almost like it's the clay's living when you're working with it, when you're building, and then it's transformed into something else, but I feel like it's still living. It's now living as a pot, and so we nickname them sometimes. And they're like, you've made them. They're like your children. And so that's my process, I guess, for the most part. And depending on how I finish them, I know the acrylic paints are probably what I use the most just to get color. A lot of times we'll finish them with dry needles. It's called a flash fire. Put the pot on the ground, and it's the orangey color you saw. It's not my favorite color, so we'll finish them off in a pile of dried pine needles and cover it up and light it on fire. It takes me just a couple minutes and to flash fire. And if I do it on a breezy day, I save them until I get a windy day. Not too windy, but just enough to, I've got some cinder blocks piled up in like a U shape. I've got a couple of them turned around, so to let a little bit of air in and get some movement of air in it. And that flames lick around on that pot, and the smoke kind of starts moving, and it gives movement to the pot. So in the end, it has a lot of interesting flame lights on it. I've experimented with that too, because I thought, Okay, so not knowing, nobody's told me I didn't take art courses or whatever. And so I played with these things like I got, I'm not sure what you call it, but the things that put bees to sleep. A little smoker, a little metal smoker. I thought, ooh, wouldn't it be cool to paint with this? You know, if you could try to put smoke where you wanted it. Smoke when it walks too. So I put pine needles in it and worked with it for a little bit. Apparently it's a combination between the heat and the smoke to get the coloring. So that works for me, is to put it in that thing I built to get the air moving. And I think that it looks really good. It's a variation of colors and get some movement with the smoke that goes on.
And speaking of the flash fire we in community, in 2005, we had Easter event. Our relatives come back to Oklahoma and teach us the pottery stamping method. And you do have to have it over a bowl or a board or something to paddle it to the bottom. Anyway, the flash firing is, I guess, another way we can talk about our larger community. We were removed from our homelands also, and our pottery wasn't revived until 100 years later, or 150 years, I forget how long. Anyway, so they came to teach us some things that we had no idea about, that we had died. And they also taught us about flash firing, and we didn't have a term for that, and we didn't know about flash firing until they came to Oklahoma and shared that with us. And I imagine it's kind of a modern, more contemporary thing to do with pottery. It's not, and you don't fire it totally outside, but it's a good thing for us to do use the kiln, for us, a good way for us to finish our pottery.
Yeah, so there's some, that's fine. There's some people that are really mean people, and not really, but I work late night. I sometimes work all night. I'm getting ready for a show in Phoenix that I leave when I get home. I unpack and repack and leave for Phoenix, but I've been working 5 a.m., 7 a.m. some days, and past people going to work. But I work after I've had my day, answering emails and phone calls and doing all that stuff. And when it's quiet and everybody else is tucked in and they've got their needs met, and so that's my quiet time to work, and it's peaceful, and you can kind of sink into a zone easier and just not realize that time has passed. So that's kind of when I'm working out.
My process is like pretty experimental. I don't really like go into the studio thinking, oh, I'm gonna make this today. The works that are in the show here came out of me just trying to do a few different things. So in the bust cast, I made a plaster cast, and when I laid the clay in there, I didn't just make like a sheet of clay and like push it in there. I took little things and I pressed it in there with like my fingers and my hands and stuff. And the back sides of those casts are actually my favorite part of that because it's got all my fingerprints in it. And so I was trying to figure out a way to get that texture to be on the front side or like the prominent part, because that's my favorite part. And that's where I was putting the clay into a pookie, a plaster former, like a slump mold, I guess. And I was putting my thumbprints in there, and as I was working, I was like, oh, these look like tiny little faces. And then so I started putting the little faces on there, and that's and then the tears piece also came from that gesture of my thumb going into the pookie and creating these separate individual thumbprints. And most of my process is pretty experimental, and I don't ever really have like a set idea of what I'm gonna do until the idea comes to me through the process. Does that make sense?
Thank you. So, we got a little bit of a late start, so I don't know if we have time to do questions, because I want to make sure that we leave room for Chase, but thank you so much for sharing your work with us. America Meredith has brought a number of copies of First American Art magazine that has articles that feature your work in it, so those are outside in the hallway if you want to check any of that out, in between sessions or what we've done today. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. No.